More than 5 years holed up inside the Ecuadorian embassy in London. Julian Assange, though, will need to wait for another week to find out whether a warrant for his arrest may be dropped. That's after a hearing in the UK was postponed until February the 13th. Anastasia Shurkina, who's been at the court, has all the details.
It was expected today that a judge would rule here at the court behind me to potentially lift the arrest warrant put in place by British officials in connection to the initial allegations made against Julian Assange by Swedish officials. His legal team has been saying since those were dropped, it's time to drop the arrest warrant. However, the judge here has decided that at this stage, this would not happen quite yet. This was technically the last legal hurdle for Julian Assange to be able to walk outside the Ecuadorian embassy and not be arrested. Now, there was certainly some confusion earlier on in the courtroom where the judge said that at this point she's not persuaded that the arrest warrant should be lifted, and lots of journalists started publishing headlines that the court had ruled against him, and Julian Assange went to Twitter, as he often does, to say that this was fake news and the hearing was actually continuing. His legal team and Julian Assange himself have said time and time again that what's key and what he fears most is possible extradition to the US. Let's take a listen.
Mr. Assange remains willing to answer to British justice in relation to any argument about breach of bail, but not at the expense of facing injustice in America. This case is and has always been about the risk of extradition to the United States, and that risk remains real.
Well, it's also been made clear that even if at some point a court here in London does decide that Julian Assange could potentially walk a free man, his concern is some kind of guarantee of free passage, again, to avoid this potential extradition to the US, given that American authorities, to say the least, are quite unhappy with the work WikiLeaks have been doing and have said time and time again that they want to see him on US soil.
The United States do something to stop Mr. Assange?
We're looking at that right now.
This guy's a traitor, a treasonous, and he has broken every law of the United States. The guy ought to be, and I'm not for the death penalty, so if I'm not for the death penalty, I only want to do it, illegally shoot the son of a...
WikiLeaks walks like a hostile intelligence service and talks like a hostile intelligence service. Ignorance or misplaced idealism is no longer an acceptable excuse for lionizing these demons.
Julian Assange's legal team will continue to battle it out here at the courtroom in London. It's clear that what's key in terms of what happens to Julian Assange will largely depend on any guarantees, including from the US, that he would not be taken there. And this is continuing to be a major hurdle despite what happens here in London, depending on the decisions that will come possibly as early as next week on February 13th.
Well, given the scale of the revelations WikiLeaks has published against the US, it's little wonder many believe Washington's keen to get its hands on Assange. For instance, WikiLeaks exposed the truth about torture at the Guantanamo Bay detention camp, as well as damning US military logs on the war in Afghanistan. The company also leaked the CIA's spying tools, as well as this.
Let me know when you gather. Or shoot. Light them all up.
202 traffic, 260.
Come on, fire.
002,
nice. Let's shoot. Thank you.
And this video you can see, which WikiLeaks called collateral murder, shows how American helicopters gunned down more than a dozen Iraqis. And more recently was obviously the story with the DNC emails, which has been suggested helped Trump win the US presidential race. Human rights campaigner Peter Tatchell believes these revelations could easily see Assange extradited.
There's no doubt that the bottom line in the Assange case is the very serious and likely risk that he would be extradited to the United States to face a whole raft of very serious charges, including espionage, which can, in theory, carry the death penalty. At the very least, he can expect 40 years in prison and possibly life imprisonment. So it is totally understandable that as a rational human being, Julian Assange would not wish to step outside the Ecuadorian embassy when that risk of arrest and extradition to the US hangs over his head.
British hacker Larry Love, who on Monday won his fight against extradition to the US, visited Assange at the embassy. The man's accused of carrying out cyber attacks on the FBI and NASA, among other organizations, while WikiLeaks is also known for publishing classified information about American politics and the work of its security services. But clearly, the two men have a lot in common and had plenty to discuss. Speaking to journalists, Love said he wished Assange luck in his case. 5 years holed up inside a small embassy left plenty of time on Assange's hands. Good thing he's had plenty of friends to visit.
He's very sexy.
He's not a journalist. He's a threat to national security.